everyone, and welcome back. This is Angela from beginninggenealogist.com. How are you doing? Today we're going to go into 19th century records. That's right, we're going to go into the 1800s. We've been looking at census records so far, starting with 1930 and working our way back. Today we're going to look at 1880 and 1870 and 1860 and 1850. So join me off camera. Let's take a close look and see what the documents hold.
Considering the 20-year gap between 1900 and 1880, close examination of the census record from 1880 is imperative. Using a blank census form downloaded from Ancestry.com, one can really see what was recorded. Of course, state and county, as well as city or township were noted, as well as personal data, including race, extending beyond black, mulatto, and white, but Indian and Chinese were also noted on the record. Marital status was noted, and it was particularly noted if a person married during that census year. An interesting notation of health of individuals was noted, whether an individual was able to work during that year or were they infirmed, and the health status of all in the household was recorded, including mental disabilities. And for the first time, the birthplace of not just the individual on the census, but also of the birthplace of the parents was recorded. Most significantly, the relationships of people in the household were reflected. Prior to that, persons in a dwelling were enumerated, but the relationships were not clearly defined. 1870 is a very important year. It is the first census taken after the end of the Civil War. All persons who had at one time in their life been enslaved, they were now enumerated by name. It should be noted that those who lived in Indian Territory were not enumerated in these two census years. Status of the individual, particularly if they were of voting age but were denied the right to vote on grounds other than rebellion or crime, were also recorded. 1860 and 1850 reflect years before the Civil War. Therefore, those who had been enslaved are not listed by name on the general population census schedules. But there are African Americans who were free people and who were enumerated in the general population census for those 2 years. In both 1860 and 1850, personal data was noted, along with information pertaining to the value of personal property and real estate. When large dollar numbers are listed among the holdings of individuals in 1860, it is also wise to take a look to see if there were slaves among their property holdings. In both census years, it clearly indicates that the records reflect those who were free. Note this heading in 1850 and this heading in 1860. Standard information was collected on individuals for both of those census years, including marital status and value of property. Literacy was also captured, and again, if one was married within that year, it was also noted. As was stated earlier, free blacks were enumerated in the 1860 and 1850 census. In this record from Harford County, Maryland in 1850, one sees several free blacks who were enumerated on the census record. Slave census records, or slave schedules, are also part of the federal census. They, like the standard census records, were collected by state, county, and city or township. But data collected on the slave schedules do not contain their names. So, How can they be used? Slave schedules provide an opportunity to study the community. The number of slave holders for that particular year can be noted. This is an image of a typical slave schedule, reflecting the names of the slave holder and statistical data on the enslaved population. Slave schedules can be a starting point to begin the slavery era research in that community, and they should not be considered the end of the road for those whose ancestors were among the enslaved. These records provide a glimpse of another aspect of the community as a whole. Compiling a list of the slaveholders for those two census years, 1860 and 1850, can be useful down the line. And it is also important to take a look at the number of slave dwellings when looking at a slave schedule. On this document, we zoom in on Thomas Drayton in South Carolina. We see that some of the slaves were held in trust from minors, whom it was expected would someday inherit those enslaved people as their property. The age, gender, and complexion are among the data collected, and it should be noted here on this document that 13 slave houses were on that estate, and it's reflected so on that page. That can mean a number of things, but it does suggest the possibility of 13 or perhaps more families resided at that particular place. If one sees no slave dwelling, there are other possibilities, such as those slaves that were owned were possibly being hired out, or in cases where less than 10 slaves resided, they may have lived in the same dwelling with the slaveholder. The information that one gets from looking at the slave records should not be considered as an end of the road. Whether enslaved or free, these records of 1850 and 1860 should be explored for the unique information that they provide. Slave schedules are a beginning and not an end. They provide a unique opportunity to learn more about the community.
Anyway, if you have any questions, let me hear from you. Certainly, I'm always here, and I'll see you next time in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.